What's up everybody, Rob here. So this is just a real quick semi-off-the-cuff video. I have some notes here so I can keep my place, but otherwise I'm just going to be going. I have some scripted videos ready to go. Should be interesting with that, but until then I'm just going to be throwing this out there. And this was inspired by a series of tweets that I had a little while ago, and it was about how warfare is portrayed in Hollywood and also books, video games, etc. And how that is completely different from how warfare was conducted in real life. Particularly, this is a focus on pre-industrial war, basically pre-firearm stuff, medieval, ancient warfare, and the tropes you see in Hollywood and other places, and how that was different from real life. But some of these general principles can basically be applied to all warfare and how it's different, from how it's portrayed in the media and the real deal. And also just want to point out that everything I'm saying here is completely a generalization. There are going to be exceptions to pretty much everything here. This is more of a general guideline, and also likewise, people who are very familiar with this subject. If you're familiar with my channel at all, if you're familiar with people within this particular type of community, you know that I'm not going to start naming names. You know who they are. Great channels, check them out. But in any case, this is not going to come as any surprise to any of you guys. This is more for either people who are brand new to the subject and would like to learn more, or for normies, basically people who have no real interest in this subject but are just either stumbling upon this, or they want to get some facts that they can impress people with at cocktail parties or whatever it is you normies do. So yeah, so basically that's pretty much it. Let's get right down to it. Okay, now the first trope that this one always bothered me, even before I really got interested in this particular aspect of history, and that was the use of armor. Armor works. Armor works really well. Depending on the type of armor and the era and all that stuff, armor makes you, I wouldn't say completely invulnerable or completely impervious, but if you have, say, a solid harness of plate armor, pretty much nothing's getting through that. Like early firearms would just bounce off. You have a really strong crossbow, might get through it, might not. They're actually domed in a certain way. They're shaped the way they are, with a lot of rounded edges so that something hits it, it will just glance off. You're pretty much, maybe a couch lance might be able to break through it, yes, maybe, but again, it's domed, it will probably slide off. So the point is though, like, you're not going to take a sword like this, swing it at somebody, and like cut through plate armor. Sorry, that's just not going to happen. Probably there are exceptions here and there, yes, of course, but generally speaking, it's not going to happen. It's not like you see in the movies, guy gets tapped on the shoulder with a one-handed sword and he falls over dead. No, sorry, it's not going to happen. In order to get through armor like that, deal with armor in that regard, you'd either need to go for the gaps, usually at the joints, the elbow, the shoulder, underneath the armpit, the base of the neck, back of the knee, the groin. Also, you can grab your opponent, wrestle him to the ground, lift up his visor, and stab him in the face. But you don't necessarily want to, though, because if he's a nobleman and you're also a nobleman, you could then just hold him ransom for money. But basically, yeah, you got to go for the gaps. Or you get something big and heavy like a mace or a warhammer or something like that, and you just start bashing away and just basically knock the guy to the ground. So those are your real options. You're basically not cutting through a guy with plate armor, or even other types of armor. For example, gambeson, which is just thick padded cloth, chainmail, obviously, another type of metal armor. Not quite as protective as plate armor, but you're pretty well protected. Like, again, a slight hit, a glancing blow with a sword is not going to knock the guy out. Sorry, it's not going to happen. They actually provided a great deal of protection, and I wouldn't say you were invulnerable, of course, but it did work. It worked very, very well. Also, it's the type of armor that's not normally seen, and that is that of helmets. Now, your head is the most important part of your body. Shocking, I know, but the way some people out there just don't use theirs, you would seem to have doubts about this. But yes, if you had to armor up one part of your body, it would be your head. And actually, in the Middle Ages, oftentimes, soldiers had to provide their own equipment, and oftentimes they couldn't afford the entire setup of armor, regardless of what the era is, whether it's mail or plate or whatever. That's not the point. If they can afford one piece of metal armor, it would be the head, and then they would add on other pieces as they gained more wealth. It would be head first, then your torso, then your arms, then your legs. That's how armor was. That was the priorities for armor, and actually as the Middle Ages progressed into the early modern era, and states took on the role of providing equipment and armor for their soldiers, these things became overly expensive for reasons. I've actually talked about this in other videos, but armor began to shrink, and it went away from the legs first. So actually there was 3/4 plate first, which basically means your shins and your feet were exposed, but the rest of you was armored up. And then it took away the tassets and the which covered the upper legs. Then forearm armor, and then basically arm armor went away. And basically, it was just a head and a breastplate, and eventually it was just the helmet and a gorget, which is upper neck protection, and eventually that went away. And then when armor was reintroduced in World War I, yes, the Cuirassiers, which had their heavy cavalry, they still wore armor, but that they're kind of a separate thing. But when armor was reintroduced for the average soldier, the first thing they armored were helmets, World War I. So there you go. So yeah, helmets were vitally important. No, the reason why they do this in Hollywood is so that you can see the actors' faces, you can see their emotion, you can see what's going on with that. Obviously, that's the trope. It makes no sense to me though, because there are open-faced helmets. They are readily available depending on whatever era it is, and you can just have them, wear those. Makes no sense. Oh, and small thing also as well. This is very small, but long flowing hair in the middle of battle. Sorry, no, that didn't happen. I'm not jealous or anything. Not jealous. It's just that if you have long hair, it's gonna get in your eyes and it's gonna get tangled in things. So if you have long hair, just tie it back. This is not a fashion thing. It's just like a not wanting to die thing. Also, your enemy can, if you're in close quarters, and like I said, grappling is a thing. That's something else for them to grab onto, and you're having a bad day. So yeah, tie your hair back and tuck it out of the way. Just a thought. The next issue I have is not what I see, but rather what I don't see, and that is the use of polearms. They're not used as often as they were in real life. Honestly, swords like this were not used very often. Well, first off, because this is a big two-handed sword, and these things weren't quite as common as Hollywood makes them out to be. But more to the point, though, the most commonly used weapon throughout history was a polearm of some kind, which, incidentally, I have. One of these. This is a javelin, and by javelin I mean it's a javelin head on top of a dowel. It's what I got. Budgets, people. I have one. But pretend this is a spear of some kind. But in any case, oftentimes the bulk of an army would be raised temporarily. These weren't professional soldiers. They would be raised temporarily from basically dirt farming peasants who really would prefer not to be there. They didn't have any real training of any particular type, and they'd be raised for a single campaign. They go on campaign and they go home. To use a sword requires a lot more skill, a lot more training to be able to use it effectively. A spear, does training help? Yes, obviously it does. But you can get a bunch of guys who don't really know what they're doing, don't want to be there. You have them stand shoulder to shoulder and have them lower their spears, and they'd be much longer than this. This is only about 5.5 feet long. These things would normally be about 7 to 8 feet long, sometimes even longer. They'd have pikes, which could be 15, some cases upwards of 20 feet long. Also pole axes, halberds, etc., etc., etc. You can put distance between yourself and your opponent, and you can use these much more effectively. You just stand there and you just stab with it. That's really all you need to do. Yes, you can do more with that, but if you're in a tensely packed formation, spears, polearms, way more effective. Also, these things are way cheaper. This little head of metal is way easier to manufacture than one of these. You put this on the end of a stick and you're good to go. So not only were polearms easier to use, they were easier to manufacture, they were cheaper. You can equip a large number of people with them relatively quickly. If you have to provide your own equipment, you can acquire one much more quickly and much more effectively. And yeah, so polearms were the most commonly used type of weapon in warfare throughout history. I mean, there are some exceptions based on civilizations. For example, steppe tribes, the Mongols, the Huns, various other steppe nomad types, they used the bow on horseback. Yes, absolutely. The Romans made very, very heavy use of the gladius. They really didn't use polearms all that much. The cavalry did. Technically, the pilum, if you want to count a javelin as a type of polearm, okay, fine, we can make that argument. But obviously, from the beginning of warfare, really until the 20th century, if you consider a rifle or a musket with a bayonet on it to be a type of polearm, which arguably it is, polearms are the way to go. So it's not really what I see, it's but what I don't see. So if you see an army of guys with swords charging at their opponents, and they're not Romans, something's probably wrong here. So if we're talking the Saxons or Vikings or something like that, and they're all using swords and axes, no, they would have used spears. They had swords and axes, certainly they did, but they were usually secondary weapons, the spear being the main event. Okay, so there you go. Polearms, way more common than are portrayed in Hollywood. Another thing, and since we're talking about charging, let's talk about charging. It really wasn't done the way you see in Hollywood. Now, were there advances of, like, did formations of troops advance? Yes, they did. Did they go like you see in Braveheart? And I know Braveheart's like the low-hanging fruit of any sort of historical thing. Was that commonplace, with everybody just like, running across the fields, screaming and yelling and just rushing towards the enemy? No, that was not very commonplace. It did happen time to time, but generally speaking, you want to maintain formation. And I have this very handy animation to explain why.
People run at different speeds. This will inevitably lead to gaps in formations. Gaps in formations could be exploited by the enemy, who can then exploit the hole that is now made in the wall, and entire armies can be defeated because some idiot didn't understand the concept of staying in a line. There you go, very simple. This animation here took me all of 3 minutes to put together. I have to rationalize the fact that I actually bought the software to do this, so yeah. But in any case, yes, stay in formation, don't get flanked, don't cause entire armies to collapse because you're in a rush. All right, there you go. Really simple, pretty straightforward.
The other issue you had was that of exhaustion. Try to remember, these guys here were not, jacked super athletes. These guys were malnourished peasants that probably didn't want to be there. They're going to be exhausted. They run from one end of the field to the other, carrying they have any kind of armor on, whether it's thick padded cloth, they might have chainmail, they might have, rudimentary plate, depending on the era and the time, who knows. They're malnourished, they're probably underfed because they're not getting, there's like logistics at this point were, let's just say, non-existent, and they're running across fields towards their enemy. They're going to be exhausted. They're not going to be able to fight. By the time they get to the enemy's just sitting there like, what are you charging for? They're going to be out of breath, and they're not going to be able to swing their weapons their swords, because they always have swords like we've talked about, and they're going to they're just not going to be an effective fighting force. It's easier just to walk at a nice steady pace, maintain your formation, not be completely out of breath, and charging, just like rushing towards the enemy like that, it wouldn't happen. And you can also say the same thing about cavalry as well. Like this blistering charge across open land with horses. No, horses get very tired very easily. They can move way faster than people, of course, but they are. But likewise, they get tired very easily. So you would actually advance them at a slow pace, at a walk, then a trot, then a canter. I think that's the order: walk, trot, canter. Maybe I have it the other way around. But in any case, up to a gallop, and then you would only be galloping, like, full-on charge, maybe the last like 30 to 50 yards. So slow acceleration, and then impact right into the enemy formation. It's not like this thing like you're going like a mile back, running across the open plains, smashing into the enemy. The horses are going to get tired. They're not going to be able to charge again if you need to. They're not going to be able to be as effective. And if you call off the charge, which did happen fairly often, because they realize, oh wait, the tactical situation is not best for us to be charging in at this moment. Okay, hold off. Well, now you just exhausted your horses for no reason. So no, that didn't really happen. Again, slow advance, gradually accelerating until the point of impact. Okay, and the last point I want to bring up here, there's a lot to cover in this, but the last point that I really want to cover is that of sieges. Now, sieges were the most common form of warfare. That's actually way more common than people think they are. Basically, battles, like open field battles, were relatively rare. There were raids and skirmishes and such, but we got like thousands of guys on one side, thousands of guys on the other side, and they're clashing together. Historically, that really didn't happen all that often. You can talk about any war in history. Most of it would be siege warfare of some kind. Basically, them having to deal with fortified strong points, whether that be a fortress, a castle, a city, anything like that. Open field battles were relatively rare. Why would you risk an open field battle when you have nice defensive fortifications you can duck behind? And, the enemy's going to have to dig you out and take serious casualties along the way. So now, during sieges themselves, let's just say sieges were taking place, and we do see it portrayed. Assaulting the city as a first resort is something that almost never happened. It did happen on occasion for reasons, but generally speaking, though, you didn't want to do that. Now, first off would be the siege. What you do is you would surround it, cut it off from outside supply, and you'd hope to starve them out. Now, this actually was a two-edged sword, because oftentimes the defenders were well-stocked, well-provisioned. They went to the surrounding countryside, brought in as much food as they can to deny you, and if they were particularly feeling in a nasty mood, they would burn everything scorched earth, leaving the guys on the outside of the castle, the besiegers, to be basically starved to death, because, like I've said before, logistics at this point was, well, virtually non-existent. You wouldn't really want to, if you were the besieging army, though, you wouldn't want to launch a frontal attack. Castles and these types of fortifications are really good at their job, and that is keeping people that shouldn't be there, keeping them out. They're really good at that. Otherwise, people wouldn't go through the time, energy, and expense of building them. So you really wouldn't want to assault it, because more than likely you lose like a third of your men and you'll accomplish virtually nothing. Even if you do capture the castle or the city or whatever it is, you're going to take heavy casualties, and then you got another city to deal with, or there's a relief force coming that you got to deal with, and now you're down, you know, you've taken that many casualties. So it really wasn't worth it. So when you tried to capture it, again, you had the besieging. Again, you could try to starve them out. You could also bribe people. You could bribe the commander and say, hey, look, we'll just pay money, come join us. That happened. You could bribe, say, a guard at night. Like, look, at 3 in the morning, leave the gate open, or open up the gate, and here's a bag of gold. That happened all the time too. You can try sneak attacks, trying to move in through, say, the sewer system. I know that's a common trope in Hollywood, but it could happen. It did happen. Weak points in the walls, maybe like grappling hooks and like ninja stuff, like in the middle of the night, and sneak around in there and do stuff like that. Yes, that could happen. But like a full-scale frontal assault, rushing towards the walls, all that stuff, that wouldn't happen. First off, because like we talked about, you're going to be tired running towards the walls, and castles generally don't move anywhere. Shocking, I know. So there's no need to run. But you're going to be tired, and you're going to be out of any sort of formation or protective, protective formation, and you're really not going to accomplish anything. What's the deal? So what you would actually do, the way sieges work generally, and this again depended on what they had, and the way a siege would be conducted was actually a very methodical thing. What you would do is, first off, cities almost always had a defensive ditch around it. Whether this was filled with water or not really depends. You'd first fill that up, and this could take weeks to set up this. What you do is you'd have your soldiers, you'd surround the city, and then you'd have your soldiers, like during the course of the day, you have to take like 10 baskets or buckets worth of earth or whatever, materials, rocks, whatever, and you have to dump that into the river. And that's what you have to do in the course of the day. I just want to point out too that sieges were mind-numbingly boring. I know that in movies and such, they have to, condense it down because you have like 2 hours, you want to get things moving, but, maybe a flash on the screen, like, 3 weeks later, we've been here for 3 weeks and whatever. But, okay, you show up there, you do your work for the day, then you just kind of like hung out for the rest of the day. 12 baskets, I think, at one siege, 12 baskets worth of earth you have to dump into the, you have to run up there, braving arrow fire and all that stuff, dump it into the moat, and then you're good for the day. But once that was filled up and you had a pathway, pathways that you could that you can move on, and this ditch was no longer an issue. You would do is, for the actual assault, was actually a very slow, methodical advance. You'd use something called a mantelet, which is basically just a wooden screen. Sometimes they'd be on wheels, sometimes it'd be sloped with a little cutaway inside of it that you can shoot a crossbow from. Sometimes it'd just be, a plank of wood on a frame that you had to physically carry. The point is, though, you had this screen. You'd slowly move your way up, really nice and slow. Get closer, closer. Okay, drop it down, rest. Okay, and then you consolidate behind you. Then you move up a little bit more, creep up, drop, rest. Those famous covering battering rams that you see, they were used. Again, not like guys rushing, running this thing because you're hauling this giant log and trying to haul this wheel battering ram thing up. You're gonna be tired. Again, slow advance. You got a roof on you. They're shooting arrows, they're dropping rocks, it'll bounce off, you're fine. Just slow, nice, easy advance. And then you launch the assault. And then you basically come up as close to the walls as you can. You bring the battering ram up to the gates, and you'd have siege ladders, which are just ladders. There's really, I don't know why people specify that they're siege ladders. They're ladders. There's really nothing special about them besides that. But in any case, you could pick up these ladders, and you'd throw them on the side of the wall, and then you'd run up. My battery's starting to run low, so I'm just going to make this a real quick point. For the defenders, things like boiling oil really weren't a thing. They didn't really have oil all that much to use, and if they did, they had other uses for it, to just, light it on fire. Boiling water would be used to pour that on attackers. Yes, certainly that would be the case. Boiling sand, or very hot sand, would also apparently be used. That was also common as well. But like any kind of flaming, this is just not generally just sieges, but just in general, like flaming projectiles, no. For example, you have like catapults firing flaming projectiles. No, the point of like a trebuchet or catapult launching any sort of rock is because you're getting hit with a giant rock. Oh, I get hit by a giant rock. but I'm also on fire, so that somehow makes it work. No, the guy's crushed. The guy's pasted on the ground. Like, lighting him on fire is not really doing anything. Fire arrows. Well, I got hit with an arrow. I'm now on fire. So no, the problem is that you just got pierced by an arrow that's moving really fast, and that's what causes it. Enough has been talked about fire arrows and fire projectiles throughout history, so that I'm not going to really go into it because it's really, there's no point to it. More than enough people have talked about it. Just I'm not saying fire weapons were not used. The Greeks, or the Byzantines, used Greek fire. They actually destroyed multiple fleets that were coming after them throughout their history, saved Constantinople on numerous occasions. But no, again, was not nearly as used as much as Hollywood would have you think, and actually in most cases would be less effective. So that is it right there. So there's a lot more I can go into with this. This is just pretty much off the cuff stuff, and just wanted to throw it out there. There's a lot more I could talk about with this subject, but my battery is flashing, it's running on fumes right now. So that is it for this video. Please hit the like and subscribe button. More videos, hopefully of a more formal, scripted type nature, coming out whenever I get around to it. And have a good day, or don't have a good day. Your adults have any kind of day you want. See you later.